The gunshot echoed through the canyon as Winifred Norris knelt in the dirt, her trembling hands clutching the empty satchel that had once contained everything she owned in this world. Blood trickled down her cheek where the outlaw's bullet had grazed her, but the physical pain paled compared to the hollow ache in her chest. 3 days of riding through the unforgiving Arizona territory, and this was where her journey to a new life had led her robbed, wounded, and abandoned on the trail to Silverwater Springs. The year was 1878, and the promise of opportunity that had drawn so many westward had proven a cruel mirage for Winifred. At 24, she was no stranger to hardship, but as she knelt in the dusty road, watching the fading silhouettes of the men who had taken everything, despair threatened to consume her entirely. The sound of approaching hoofbeats made her heart stutter with fear. Another rider, perhaps one of the bandits returning to finish what they'd started. She scrambled behind a large boulder, pressing her back against the sun-warmed stone, holding her breath. "Hello," a deep voice called out. "Anyone still alive out here?" Winifred remained silent, straining to hear over the pounding of her own pulse. "Saw the dust from the ridge," the voice continued, closer now. "If you're hiding, I ain't here to cause trouble. Just passing through and thought someone might need help." The sincerity in the stranger's tone gave her pause. After several moments of indecision, Winifred peered around the edge of the boulder. A tall man sat atop a chestnut stallion, silhouetted against the setting sun. His broad-shouldered frame was topped by a worn Stetson, and though she couldn't make out his features clearly, there was no mistaking the rifle resting across his lap. "Are you hurt, miss?" he asked, spotting her immediately. Winifred stepped out slowly, one hand pressed to her bleeding cheek. "They took everything," she said, hating how her voice cracked. "My horse, my supplies. Everything." The stranger dismounted in one fluid motion, his spurs jingling softly as his boots hit the ground. As he approached, Winifred could see him more clearly, tall and weathered, with eyes the color of the sky after a storm and a jawline shadowed with several days' growth of beard. He wasn't young, but he wasn't old either, perhaps 30 or so, with lines at the corners of his eyes that spoke of long days under the harsh western sun. "Owen Forsythe," he said by way of introduction, keeping a respectful distance. "Folks call me Forsythe. You're bleeding." "Winifred Norris," she replied automatically, then immediately regretted giving her real name to a stranger. "It's just a graze." Forsythe reached slowly into his saddlebag and withdrew a canteen and a clean handkerchief. He dampened the cloth and offered it to her, handle first. "Clean that cut before it festers." Winifred hesitated before accepting it. "Thank you," she said stiffly, pressing the cool cloth to her cheek. "How many were there?" he asked, scanning the horizon. "3. They rode northeast." She gestured vaguely in the direction the bandits had disappeared. Forsythe nodded thoughtfully. "Well, Miss Norris, Silverwater Springs is about 12 miles west. My ranch is 5 miles south of here. Can't leave you out here with night coming on. There's wolves in these hills and worse things than wolves." "I'll manage," Winifred said, though she had no idea how. Forsythe's weathered face registered surprise. "Begging your pardon, but you've got no horse, no supplies, and you're injured. These parts aren't forgiving to the unprepared." "I don't need your charity," she said more sharply than intended, pride rising like a shield. "It's not charity to help someone in need," he countered, his tone remaining gentle. "It's what decent folk do." Winifred felt tears threatening and blinked them back fiercely. "I don't deserve kindness," she whispered, the words escaping before she could stop them. Forsythe studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he said with surprising softness, "Then you'll learn it here. Come on, Miss Norris. My horse can carry two, and there's a storm brewing." He gestured toward the darkening sky where heavy clouds were gathering on the western horizon. Winifred weighed her options, which were painfully few. The thought of accepting help from this stranger went against everything her life had taught her, but the alternative was potentially deadly. "Very well," she conceded finally. "But I'll repay you, Mr. Forsythe. I'm not a charity case." A faint smile crossed his face. "Never thought you were, Miss Norris." He helped her onto his horse before mounting behind her, maintaining a respectful distance as they set off toward his ranch. They rode in silence as the first fat raindrops began to fall, pelting the dusty ground and filling the air with the rich scent of desert rain. "Been a rancher long?" Winifred asked eventually, needing to fill the silence. 6 years, Forsythe replied. "Came out west after the war. Needed open sky and room to breathe." "The war," she echoed, understanding immediately. The conflict had ended 13 years ago, but its shadows lingered in countless lives. "You fought for the Union." "I did. 49th Illinois Infantry." His voice was measured, revealing nothing of whatever horrors he'd witnessed. "You from back east, Miss Norris?" "St. Louis," she answered, grateful for the rain that masked the tears that had begun to fall. "There was nothing left for me there." They crested a ridge, and below them spread a modest ranch nestled in a sheltered valley. A sturdy cabin stood beside a barn and corral, with a creek winding through the property. Several cattle grazed in a nearby pasture, and smoke curled from the cabin's chimney. "Home," Forsythe said simply as they descended toward it. As they approached, a young man emerged from the barn, waving. "You're back early. Thought you'd be in town till—" He stopped short upon seeing Winifred. "Oh, hello, madam. This is Calvin," Forsythe explained as they reached the yard. "My ranch hand. Calvin, this is Miss Norris. She was set upon by bandits on the North Trail, lost everything." Calvin, who couldn't have been more than 19, removed his hat respectfully. "Pleased to meet you, madam. Sorry about your trouble." Forsythe dismounted and helped Winifred down, steadying her when her legs trembled beneath her. "Calvin, would you see to midnight? Miss Norris needs tending to." Inside the cabin, Winifred was struck by its unexpected comfort. Though simple, it was clean and well-ordered, with a stone fireplace, solid wooden furniture, and shelves lined with books. A quilt in rich earth tones covered a bed in the corner, and cooking implements hung neatly from hooks near the iron stove. "Sit," Forsythe said, gesturing to a chair at the wooden table. He moved to the stove where a pot of something savory simmered. "When did you last eat?" "Yesterday," Winifred admitted, suddenly aware of her gnawing hunger. He ladled stew into a bowl and placed it before her along with a chunk of bread. "Eat. Then we'll tend to that cut properly." The stew was surprisingly good, rich with meat and vegetables. Winifred ate slowly at first, then with increasing urgency as her body demanded nourishment. Forsythe busied himself gathering supplies: clean cloths, a small bottle, a tin of salve. When she'd finished eating, he pulled a chair close to hers. "This might sting," he warned, uncorking the bottle. "Whiskey. Best disinfectant I know." Winifred braced herself as he dabbed the alcohol-soaked cloth against her wound. She hissed through her teeth but remained still. "You're tough," he observed, cleaning the cut with a gentle touch that belied his rugged appearance. "I've had practice," she replied grimly. His fingers paused momentarily before continuing their work. "What brings you to these parts, Miss Norris?" Winifred considered how much to reveal. "A job. I'm to be the new schoolteacher in Silverwater Springs." Forsythe's eyebrows rose slightly as he applied salve to the wound. "Teacher, eh? We could use more learning in these parts. Children here grow up knowing cattle and crops, but not much else." "You have children, Mr. Forsythe," she asked, suddenly curious about this solitary rancher. A shadow crossed his face. No, never married. Something in his tone discouraged further questions on the subject. Winifred changed course. Those men who robbed me, they took the letter confirming my position. The town council might not believe me without it. Mayor Willoughby leads the council, Forsythe said, putting away his medical supplies. He's a reasonable man. I'll vouch for you when we ride into town tomorrow. You would do that? Winifred asked, surprised. Why wouldn't I? She had no answer that wouldn't reveal too much of herself. Instead, she said, "Where will I sleep tonight?" "You'll take the bed," Forsythe replied, nodding toward the corner. "I'll bunk in the barn with Calvin." "I couldn't possibly." "You can and you will," he interrupted firmly. "You need proper rest to heal, no arguments." Too exhausted to protest further, Winifred nodded. "Thank you." Later, as she lay beneath the warm quilt, listening to the rain drumming on the roof, Winifred tried to reconcile Owen Forsythe with her understanding of the world. In her experience, kindness always came with conditions and expectations. Yet this man had offered help without demanding anything in return. It unsettled her deeply. Sleep claimed her eventually, but her dreams were haunted by the faces of the men she'd fled in St. Louis, particularly Theodore Blackstone, whose unwanted advances had turned to threats when rejected. She woke with a start before dawn, heart pounding, momentarily disoriented in the unfamiliar surroundings. Forsythe was already up, stoking the fire in the stove. "Bad dreams?" he asked without turning. Winifred pushed herself upright. "How did you know?" "You called out in your sleep." He glanced over his shoulder, his expression concerned but not prying. "Coffee, please." They shared a simple breakfast of corn porridge and strong coffee. Calvin joined them, bringing news that a stray calf had been found in the north pasture. "We'll head to town after we deal with the calf," Forsythe told Winifred. "I need supplies anyway." The morning air was crisp and clean after the rain as Winifred accompanied Forsythe to the pasture. She watched from the fence as he and Calvin gently guided the frightened calf back to its mother. "You're good with them," she observed when he returned to her side. "Animals respond to patience," he replied, wiping his brow. "People too, mostly." On the ride to Silverwater Springs, Winifred found herself studying Forsythe's profile against the landscape. There was something reassuring in his steady presence, a solidness she'd rarely encountered. Yet beneath his calm exterior, she sensed depths of experience, perhaps pain, that he kept carefully contained. Silverwater Springs proved to be larger than she'd expected, a proper town with wooden sidewalks, a church spire rising above the buildings, and the bustle of commerce in full swing. Heads turned as Forsythe helped Winifred dismount in front of the town hall, curious eyes noting her injury and disheveled appearance. Mayor Willoughby, a portly man with impressive mustaches, received them in his office. His skepticism about Winifred's claim was evident until Forsythe spoke on her behalf. "I've known Owen Forsythe for 6 years," the mayor told Winifred after hearing their story. "If he vouches for your character, that's good enough for me. The schoolhouse has been empty since Miss Holloway married and moved to Denver last spring. It has living quarters attached." Relief washed over Winifred. "When may I begin?" "Monday next would be fine," the mayor said. "That gives you a few days to settle in. The town will provide basic furnishings, but you'll need personal items." "Which brings us to another matter," Forsythe interjected. "Miss Norris lost everything to those bandits. She'll need an advance on her salary." The mayor frowned slightly. "That's not standard practice." "I understand it's unusual," Winifred said quickly, "but I assure you I'm committed to my position here. I wouldn't ask if there were any alternative." After some negotiation, the mayor agreed to a modest advance, with the town's general store extending credit for immediate necessities. Outside, Winifred turned to Forsythe. "I don't know how to thank you." "No thanks needed," he replied. "Let's get you outfitted with what you need." At the general store, Forsythe helped her select practical items: clothing, bedding, toiletries, and basic kitchen supplies. When the storekeeper tallied the bill, Forsythe quietly added several items to her account: a warm shawl, a good quality writing desk, and a small bookshelf. "Mr. Forsythe, I can't accept these extras," Winifred protested when she realized what he'd done. "Consider it a welcome gift from the community," he said, his tone brooking no argument. "A school teacher needs proper tools." They delivered her purchases to the schoolhouse, a simple but sound structure at the edge of town. The attached living quarters were small but clean, with a pot-bellied stove, a narrow bed, and windows that allowed in ample light. "It's perfect," Winifred said, turning slowly to take it all in. For the first time since arriving in the territory, she felt a glimmer of hope. Forsythe lingered in the doorway. "I should be getting back to the ranch. Will you be all right here?" The question carried more weight than its simple words suggested. Winifred met his gaze directly. "Yes." "Thanks to you." He nodded once, then hesitated. "Sunday's the social at the church. Whole town turns out. Might be a good way to meet folks before school starts." "Will you be there?" she asked before she could stop herself. A smile ghosted across his lips. "I might be persuaded." After he left, Winifred sat on her new bed, running her fingers over the simple cotton quilt. In just 24 hours, Owen Forsythe had appended her carefully constructed defenses. It was unsettling. And yet, something inside her that had been clenched tight for years seemed to loosen just slightly. The days before school began passed in a flurry of preparation. Winifred cleaned the schoolhouse thoroughly, organized books and supplies, and created lesson plans for students ranging from 6 to 16 years old. Several town women stopped by with welcoming gifts: jars of preserves, freshly baked bread, a handmade pincushion, each visibly curious about the new teacher with the healing cut on her cheek. Sunday arrived bright and clear. Winifred dressed carefully in her new calico dress, pinning her dark hair in a simple but neat style. The church service was followed by a social on the grounds, with tables laden with food and children playing games while adults visited. Winifred stood somewhat awkwardly at the edge of the gathering, until Mrs. Peterson, the doctor's wife, drew her into a circle of women who peppered her with questions about her background and teaching experience. She provided carefully edited answers, sharing enough to satisfy curiosity without revealing the painful truths of her past. "Miss Norris," a familiar voice said behind her. She turned to find Forsythe, looking almost transformed in clean trousers and a pressed shirt, his usually unruly hair tamed. "Mr. Forsythe," she replied, absurdly pleased to see him. "I wasn't sure you'd come. Promised, didn't I?" He offered his arm. "Have you eaten?" They filled plates with fried chicken, biscuits, and various salads, finding a quiet spot beneath a cottonwood tree to eat. Forsythe pointed out various townspeople, providing helpful context about who was who in Silverwater Springs. "Are you nervous about tomorrow?" he asked as they finished their meal. "A little," she admitted. "I want to make a good impression." "You will," he said with such certainty that she almost believed him. As the afternoon waned, Forsythe walked her back to the schoolhouse. At her door, he removed his hat, turning it in his hands. "I brought you something," he said, reaching into his pocket. He withdrew a small silver bell. "Every teacher needs a bell." Winifred took it, touched beyond measure by the simple gift. "Thank you." "I'll be bringing some cattle to auction next Saturday," he said. "Thought I might stop by, see how your first week went." "I'd like that," she replied softly. Her first day as teacher began with 23 children of various ages regarding her with a mixture of curiosity, skepticism, and in a few cases, mischief. Winifred rang her new bell to call them to order, feeling a surge of confidence as its clear tone brought immediate attention. "Good morning," she began. "I'm Miss Norris, and I'm delighted to be your teacher." By day's end, Winifred had learned all their names, assessed their abilities, broken up one fight, and earned the tentative respect of even the most reluctant students. As she watched them scatter toward home after dismissal, a profound sense of rightness settled over her. This place, this role, it felt like the beginning of something genuine. The week passed in a blur of lessons, getting to know her students and gradually becoming part of the community. Several times, she caught herself looking forward to Saturday with an anticipation that both thrilled and frightened her. When Forsythe appeared at her door that evening, having concluded his business at the cattle auction, Winifred invited him in for coffee. They sat at her small table as she recounted stories from her first week of teaching. "You seem happy," he observed, watching her over the rim of his cup. "I am," she realized with some surprise. "Happier than I've been in a very long time." Something shifted in the air between them, a recognition of possibilities. Forsythe cleared his throat. "There's a dinner at the hotel next Friday. Mayor's hosting it for some railroad men coming through. Town folk are invited. Would you consider accompanying me?" Winifred's heart quickened. Like a social engagement, a smile crinkled the corners of his eyes. Like a proper escort, yes, she should say no. Getting involved with anyone was not part of her careful plan for her new life, and yet, "I'd be pleased to accompany you, Mr. Forsythe." "Owen," he corrected gently. "If we're to be properly sociable, you might use my given name." "Owen," she repeated, testing the sound of it. "Then you must call me Winifred." Their first official outing together drew interested glances from the townspeople. Winifred, in her best dress with a borrowed cameo at her throat, felt both conspicuous and strangely proud to be on Owen's arm. He introduced her confidently to everyone they encountered, his hand occasionally resting lightly at the small of her back in a way that sent warmth cascading through her. During dinner, she found herself studying him when he wasn't looking, the way his hands moved when he spoke, the genuine interest he showed when listening to others, the respect he commanded without demanding it. This was a man comfortable in his own skin, despite whatever burdens he carried. As autumn deepened, their relationship developed gradually. Owen would appear on Sunday afternoons to take her riding or walking along the creek. Sometimes they simply sat on the schoolhouse steps, talking as the sun set. He told her about his ranch, his dreams of expanding it, the nightmares from the war that still occasionally haunted him. She shared stories of her students, her hopes for their education, and carefully selected anecdotes from her past. Yet Winifred maintained certain boundaries. When conversations veered too close to her life in St. Louis, she deftly changed the subject. If Owen noticed, he didn't press. His patience was a balm to her wounded spirit, allowing her to open up at her own pace. One crisp November afternoon, as they walked through fallen leaves in the town square, Owen took her hand for the first time. It was a simple gesture, but it sent her pulse racing. His calloused fingers entwined with hers felt right, like pieces fitting together. "Winifred," he said quietly, stopping beneath a maple tree ablaze with autumn color, "I find myself thinking of you at the most unexpected moments. When I'm mending fences or checking the herd, suddenly you're there in my mind. Your smile, your voice." Her breath caught as he gently turned her to face him. "I'm not a man of fancy words," he continued, still holding her hand, "but I care for you deeply. I'd like your permission to court you properly." The moment she'd both longed for and dreaded had arrived. Winifred looked into his earnest eyes and knew she couldn't continue without honesty between them. "Before you decide that," she said carefully, "there are things about me you should know, things I've kept hidden." Concern crossed his features. "Whatever it is, you can tell me." They sat on a nearby bench, and with trembling hands clasped tightly in her lap, Winifred told him about Theodore Blackstone, the wealthy businessman who had pursued her relentlessly in St. Louis. How his initial courtesy had turned to obsession, then to threats when she refused his advances. How he'd used his influence to cost her her teaching position, to spread rumors that destroyed her reputation. How he'd finally cornered her one night with intentions that made her blood run cold even now, remembering. "I fought him off," she said, voice barely above a whisper. "I struck him with a fire iron. He was bleeding when I ran. I don't know if he lived or died. I just fled, took the first train west I could afford. I've been looking over my shoulder ever since." Owen's face had darkened as she spoke, his jaw clenching with suppressed anger. "So when you said you didn't deserve kindness, I may have killed a man," she finished. "How can I deserve anything good after that?" For a long moment he was silent, and Winifred braced herself for his rejection. Instead, he took her hands gently in his. "Winifred, listen to me carefully," he said, his voice low and intense. "You defended yourself against a man who meant you harm. That doesn't make you undeserving of kindness or happiness. It makes you brave." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "You don't think less of me." "I think more of you," he said firmly. "Surviving what you did, building a new life, caring for your students the way you do, those are the actions of a remarkable woman." He reached up to brush away a tear from her cheek, his touch infinitely tender. "And if this Blackstone is still alive and ever shows his face around here, he'll answer to me." Relief and gratitude washed over her in equal measure. "You still want to court me knowing all this?" "More than ever," he assured her, a smile warming his eyes. "If you'll have me." In answer, Winifred leaned forward and pressed a soft kiss to his weathered cheek. "I would like that very much, Owen Forsythe." As winter descended on Silverwater Springs, Winifred and Owen's courtship became the talk of the town. He escorted her to church each Sunday, joined her for dinner twice weekly, and often arrived at the schoolhouse with small, thoughtful gifts, a book of poetry, wildflower seeds for spring planting, a carved wooden letter opener for her desk. December brought heavy snows and the excitement of Christmas preparations. The schoolhouse buzzed with activity as children practiced carols and created handmade decorations. Owen helped Winifred arrange a Christmas pageant, building a simple stable scene and even donning a makeshift costume as one of the wise men when a parent fell ill. On Christmas Eve, after the successful pageant, Owen invited Winifred to the ranch for dinner. Calvin, who had become like a younger brother to her, had decorated the cabin with pine boughs and candles. The meal was festive: roast goose, potatoes, fresh bread, and an apple pie that Owen admitted purchasing from Mrs. Carpenter, the baker's wife. After dinner, Calvin discreetly made himself scarce, heading to the barn with a wink that made Winifred blush. Alone by the fire, Owen presented her with a small package wrapped in brown paper and tied with red ribbon. "Merry Christmas, Winnie," he said, using the nickname that only he was permitted. Inside was a delicate silver locket on a fine chain. When opened, it contained a tiny pressed wildflower. "It's the first flower you admired on our walk by the creek," he explained as he fastened it around her neck. "I preserved it, hoping someday to give it to you like this." "It's beautiful," she whispered, deeply moved by the sentiment behind the gift. She gave him her gift, a hand-knitted scarf in deep blue that matched his eyes, and a book of Mark Twain's writings that she'd ordered specially from Denver. As the fire crackled and snow fell softly outside the windows, Owen took her hands in his. "Winifred, these past months have been the happiest of my life." "Mine too," she admitted, allowing herself to fully embrace the feeling. "I want to ask you something," he continued, suddenly looking uncharacteristically nervous. "But I want you to answer honestly, not out of any sense of obligation or gratitude." Her heart began to race as he slid from the sofa to one knee before her. "Winifred Norris, I love you. Not just for your courage or your kindness or your beautiful smile, though I love all those things too. I love who you are completely. Would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife?" Tears of joy sprang to her eyes. "Yes," she said without hesitation. "Yes, Owen Forsythe. I love you, and I would be proud to be your wife." His face lit with joy as he rose to gather her in his arms, sealing their engagement with a tender kiss that promised a lifetime of the kindness she had once believed she didn't deserve. They were married in the spring, with wildflowers dotting the ranch and the scent of new beginnings in the air. The entire town turned out for the celebration, the schoolchildren forming an honor guard with flower petals and ribbons. Winifred continued teaching, riding to and from town each day on the dappled mare Owen had given her as a wedding gift. Together, they expanded the ranch, adding sheep to their cattle operation and planting an orchard that would bear fruit in years to come. 2 years after their wedding, a letter arrived from St. Louis. Theodore Blackstone had indeed survived his injury, but the scandal of his behavior had ruined him socially and financially. He had left the city in disgrace, moving east to try to rebuild his fortune, and posed no further threat to Winifred. The news lifted the last shadow from her heart. That evening, sitting on the porch of their expanded cabin, watching the sunset paint the western sky in gold and crimson, Winifred rested her head on her husband's shoulder. "You remember what you said to me that first day?" she asked, her hand instinctively cradling the gentle swell of her belly where their first child grew. "When I said I didn't deserve kindness," Owen smiled, covering her hand with his own, "I said you'd learn it here." Winifred looked up at him, at the love shining in his eyes, and felt the profound truth of it. "I did learn it," she said softly. "You taught me that kindness isn't earned, it's given freely. And now I get to pass that lesson on." As if in agreement, the child within her moved, a gentle flutter of new life. Owen's eyes widened in wonder as he felt it beneath his palm. In that perfect moment, surrounded by the home and family they had built together, Winifred knew with absolute certainty that this was what healing looked like, not the absence of scars, but the presence of love strong enough to transform them into something beautiful. "I love you, Owen Forsythe," she whispered against his lips as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. "And I love you, Winifred Forsythe," he replied, holding his world in his arms. "Today, tomorrow, and all the days that follow,